Welcome to our January Intro to Admissions Counseling webinar series. We're glad to have you with us. My name is Palmer Muntz, and I am co-chair for professional development for PNACAC. And I'm joined by Ray Pepley, who is my co-chair today. Before we get into our session, I wanted to mention a couple of things real quickly. Let me get over to get my pointer over to the right slide. There we go. We have one of these every month. So there, for those of you who might be new, well, our next one will be in February. We will be talking about how to help students understand their financial aid offers and college costs. Also want to put it on your radar that this May, we will be having our annual conference in Salem, Oregon at Willamette University. And as it says on the slide, feel free to submit a session proposal. That's still open right now, and we'd be glad to have you do that. So with that, let me introduce I've slipped by this slide. I should mention this, especially for this group. We are also this summer holding our Summer Institute. Summer Institute is sort of inside code language in college admissions for a training program designed especially for college admissions folks who are relatively new to the profession. It's going to be held at University of Portland. Registration's not open yet, but I wanted you to be aware of this in case you'd like to talk with your supervisor about possibly being able to attend. And we'll be holding it concurrently with a Middle Management Institute, which is designed for those who are perhaps new to management or are aspiring to move up in the profession. So with that, our topic for today is transfer recruitment basics. I've been doing this a very long time, and transfer recruitment is still one of the great mysteries of the admissions profession to me. Our presenters this month are Rob Findtner, who is the Associate Director for Transfer Recruitment at Portland State University. Rob and I go back a long, long ways. And Rob formerly was Director of Admissions at Western Oregon University. And Jesse Sims from Northern Arizona University, where, Jesse, I'm not sure your title, Recruitment Manager, is that right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Jesse's been working in admissions since 2017, and he is based in Seattle. So he's a regional admissions counselor. And with that, Jesse and Rob, let me turn off my screen sharing, give it to you. And I know I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you for taking this on for us.
All right, thank you, Palmer. So again, today's presentation will be covering kind of the basics of transfer admissions, the ins and outs, what to expect when you're out on the road recruiting transfer students throughout your territories, whether it's here in the Pacific Northwest or in other parts of the country. So as Palmer mentioned earlier, there are two of us delivering this presentation today. So my name is Jesse Sims. I am the recruitment manager for Northern Arizona University here in the Pacific Northwest. So a slightly different environment than most of Arizona, but I live in Seattle. So if you ever have any questions or need to reach out, just shoot me an email and I'm happy to answer some of those questions about transfer admissions. I've also worked in first year admissions and graduate admissions at NAU. So I'm pretty experienced both being on campus and now as a regionally based recruiter. So I'm happy to kind of be a point of contact if you ever have any questions about how all of this works. And Rob, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Jesse. And yes, as Palmer shared, I think the first time we met was when Palmer was at Oregon Tech in 1998. So yes, I've been in the profession for about 26 years. And in a former life, actually, I was a transfer student. I started my higher education journey at Lynn Benton Community College, just outside of Albany, where I grew up and spent a year there or 3 terms, then transferred to one of the public universities. So I think transfer is near and dear to my heart. And then I arrived at Portland State. It's now been 2 years ago in this role and directly serving transfer students. And something I think it's unique about Portland State is about half of our population, new students, are transfer students. So I think that's something that's very unique about Portland State. And I think we have some program services that really directly serve transfers. So I think as Jesse shared, happy to be a resource for folks that might be just starting to work with transfers or have an interest or what the case may be. Happy to serve as a resource as well. So with that, I think Jesse has the first slide. I think we're going to be tag teaming would be the best way to put it. So with that, I'll let Jesse take on that first slide.
As we agreed, I have the NAU blue slides and you have the Portland State green slides. So yeah, thank you, Rob, for kind of talking about how your institution really kind of focuses helping transfer students. And with that, every institution that you encounter will probably have a slightly different definition on what a transfer student is or who they are. So Rob, like, do you have a certain definition for what makes a transfer student at Portland State in those cases?
Yeah, really, as for us, Jesse, it's a student that has essentially graduated from high school or earned their credential. In the case, it could be a GED, and has completed a certain number of transferable credits is really what we're looking at, just in general, that definition of a transfer student. And
All right.
you could probably talk about this. Sometimes there could be some nuances, like, am I a transfer student? Like, where do I fall? But I'll let you address that.
Yeah, and of course at NAU, we have a pretty hard set definition. If you graduated from high school and earned 12 or more transferable college credits since high school graduation, that's how you're defined as a transfer student. So you can kind of see how different institutions may be different and how they define who a transfer student is. And then when it comes to the actual individual student, they're all going to have different needs. And we especially see this within our transfer communities. So you may have students transferring from two-year institutions like community colleges or technical schools, four-year institutions, whether they're other public institutions or private institutions. So you really have to understand your own institution's admission requirements whenever you're talking to transfer students, because it can vary by institution and they may be reaching out to several. So it's almost similar to first-year recruitment in that way, but then you have that additional level where they already have that college experience in some cases. Now, that said, you may also have some more non-traditional students. So students that may have taken a gap year, or they may be more mature in their age and they want to continue their education in some cases. So they might have started, 15, 20 years ago. They may have graduated in 2020 and took a break during COVID. So you'll have different scenarios every day with transfer students in this profession. Additionally, on top of that, you'll have veterans. So they may have a gap due to their service, or they may have earned credits through the military or at campuses, their military bases. So in many cases, these students may have like 5 or 6 different transcripts that they're sending in. And then, of course, many of these students will have their own family obligations, their own work commitments. So they're looking for certain types of classes that are offered at certain times. And then we often encounter, especially I know at NAU, lots of students wanting to be, part-time. So there are different calculations that go into financial aid for these students in many cases. And that can especially apply to online learners. So you have several different needs for these students that you may not commonly see with your first-year populations. So in terms of defining who a transfer student is, it comes to how many hours they have after high school graduation in some cases, but also based on the individual and their individual needs as a student. Anything you want to add to that, Rob, before we go to your next slide?
No, Jesse, I think you did a really good job of, I think, paraphrasing, that transfer population is diverse in so many different ways. And so I think you did a great job of outlining the diversity, once again, whether it's age, their needs in terms of course delivery, family obligations, commitments, it's a very diverse population in that respect. Now for the admission process, if you were to ask, is it the same on every campus? No. But I think there can also just be some maybe common themes or maybe pieces that we look at to render a decision. So one is the cumulative transfer GPA. Essentially, what we're doing is we're looking at all transcripts that are provided by a student and calculating that overall or cumulative GPA. Well, you can say that that's similar to a first-year applicant in terms of what's your cumulative GPA. And I joke sometimes we have first-year students say, well, are you only looking at maybe my senior courses? How does this work? And maybe it's similar to transfers where we're looking at all of your coursework and calculating that cumulative GPA. Often it's going to be a member of the evaluation team on the operations side that is responsible for calculating that cumulative GPA. So that's one piece that we're looking at. Once again, that varies by institution. Full disclosure, at Portland State, our minimum GPA requirement for transfer admission is a 2.25. We also look at a minimum number of credits to be a transfer student. And so for Portland State, it is 30 transferable quarter hours or 20 semester hours. If I'm correct, Jesse, you'd reference it was 12 for NAU. So it can really vary. I think the other piece to think about too is when did a student complete those credits? I think as we talked about in the beginning, for a transfer student, often we're looking at a student who's already graduated from high school, they're a high school graduate, or they've earned their credential in terms of a GED, so they've completed their high school experience and they've been in that community college setting, 4-year setting to be a transfer student. We are looking for those transcripts from each and every institution that the student has attended. Sometimes this can be a point of confusion. Now, I'll use an example. A student may say, I went to a 4-year institution, transferred to a community college. And so if I just send you my community college transcript because it has the 4-year coursework, that's fine, right? At least for Portland State, the answer is no. We do need official transcripts, and official means that it's coming directly from the institution that awarded that credit. So what I see sometimes at Portland State is that student, well-meaning, they request that official transcript from a prior institution. Maybe it's sent through a third party such as Parchment, but the student has it sent to their email address, then tries to forward to me, and I'll say, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we cannot use this transcript for admission purposes. And it's really frustrating for the student because that time, energy, cost they put into it, and they're kind of starting fresh with putting that transcript request in. So if you're working with transfers in terms of defining what is an official transcript, and of course, I think for all of us, we still accept old school hard copy. If they're still sealed in that envelope, the student hasn't opened it, it's probably has a signature on the back from the registrar or a representative from the institution. It might be dated as well, as long as the student doesn't open it. It's good to go in terms of being an official transcript. Some institutions may have like specific course requirements for admission as a transfer student. So case in point at Portland State, we look for Writing 121 or the equivalent, and then it's been completed with a C- or better. There may be institutions that have a writing and maybe a mathematics requirement, or they may not have a course-specific requirement. In general, ACT or SAT scores are not required for transfer admission purposes, so students may choose to send the scores, but at Portland State, we don't use that information for transfer admission decisions. And then essays really can vary by institution. At Portland State, if a student is meeting our requirements for transfer admission, we're going to be asking for any type of essays or letters of recommendation. But we do have some academic programs that will require maybe a separate application and essay. So a good example would be our undergraduate online and as well as in-person social work program, our Bachelor of Social Work. There's a separate application just opened up, by the way, and so students have to complete certain steps that's specific to that program. But Jesse, anything else that you want to add in terms of maybe requirements for NAU, or if there's other institutions that may have specific course requirements or other, I want to make sure that you can share your perspective as well.
Yeah, just two things. I have a great example from today. Sometimes you'll often see transfer students waiting until the very last moment to apply and be admitted. And I have a student, we have all of his college transcripts. I think he has 4 different institutions, but he's under the age of 22 and we don't have his official high school transcript. So we cannot admit him per Arizona state law. So in many cases, you do need to have their final official high school transcript as well if they're under a certain age for admission purposes. Additionally, I've seen several times where students look at our website and they say, oh, I can transfer up to 64 credits. That's very true, but their specific academic program may only accept up to 30 credits in some cases. So you really have to advise students to also get in touch with the academic advising departments within their academic college in some cases to see how specific courses will actually go into their course progression plan, as opposed to how many maximum credits the university will accept whenever they transfer. So that's something I've run into several times with students as well. And again, that varies by institution. So that's kind of the theme of the presentation, is it varies by institution on what they're looking for. With that said, I can switch my slide here. There we go. So when we're talking about these transfer policies, as I just alluded to, every institution may be different, but there are some commonalities in what institutions are looking for. So when I talked earlier about some of those non-traditional students that I've seen credits that are coming from institutions that were completed before I was born in some cases. And I'm not going to disclose that year, but I'm nearly 31, so you can do the math. So some institutions, like, we may have to articulate those courses, so it may take a little longer for an English 121 course that was offered in 1987 at some institutions, but these credits don't expire. So there may be a gap in how we can accept the course, but the credits will not expire themselves. So even if they completed courses in 1987, as Rob mentioned earlier, we still need that official transcript. So that's going to be pretty common at most institutions. And as I alluded to earlier, there are some transferable credit limits that may exist in institutions and specific academic programs or specific academic colleges. So it's good to be kind of aware of kind of the general frame that you're looking for there, but you don't have to have the exact numbers unless you are working for a specific academic college as a recruiter. And then the accreditation of an institution is also very important. So just as you probably, whenever you're talking to prospective students, you're like, we're regionally accredited. That's what most institutions are looking for with that accreditation status. We have several students that may be, going to online institutions that have national accreditation or no accreditation at all. So it is a good idea to ask that question of when the student's on the phone or something, like, where are you going to college now? And kind of walking them through some of those questions if their school does have that national accreditation or no accreditation affiliation at all. And then when it comes to vocational and technical credits, on the first slide, I mentioned that sometimes we see students who are veterans or from the military transferring in, and they have some credits from their military coursework they've completed. Sometimes those credits may not transfer, or they may be elective credits. So these are often limited in how many of those could actually transfer over to an institution that's 4-year. And then I know here in Washington, get quite a few in Oregon. We're seeing it more and more with our Arizona students as well. Students going through dual enrollment, or they're earning credits through advanced placement or international baccalaureate exams, Running Start here in the state of Washington. So these are credits that can obviously transfer. And this is, again, though, where we will need individual high school transcripts and those college transcripts to be separate. So you always want to coach students in these situations that even if it shows up on their high school transcript, they'll need a College Board transcript. They'll need an IB diploma if they want to transfer those credits. So you start to have to walk through those steps with those high school students who may have credits coming in from high school, or maybe they took a gap after graduation and started getting credits elsewhere, but we still need those AP and IB diplomas or the College Board transcript to transfer those credits over. And then something that I get quite often, Arizona is a semester-based state. Here in the Pacific Northwest, you have more quarter schools and more trimester systems. So when students are going and seeing how their credits articulate at semester-based institutions from a quarter-based institution, it may be like how we calculate it as 3.45 credits or 2.76. So they can be pretty funky sometimes. So kind of preparing students for that translation from a quarter system to a semester-based, or vice versa, can be something to kind of walk through students as well if they're having questions about that, and then connecting them with their academic advisor to really walk through how that applies to their degree program. And anything you want to add to that, Rob, that you can think of?
Yeah, I think, Jesse, one is the credit limit. What I see primarily, I think, for the public universities in Oregon, in general. I think that limit, at least from two-year institutions, it's about 124. So I've worked with some students that attended multiple institutions. Primarily, it's going to be junior college, community college, and they'll say, Rob, I got a lot of credit. How does that work? And so we are trying our best at Portland State to determine, okay, what's your intended major, thinking about core requirements and trying our best to select the coursework that really is going to be applicable towards those degree requirements. Is it perfect? No, but so there is that limitation as you reference. I think accreditation, what I've run into as well is students saying, well, my institution, it's accredited, but it's closed. How do I even get transcripts? So I've had to put on that detective hat. Sometimes it helps students, like, let's figure out how to get transcripts. Is it something you can order through a third party? Is it maybe a state agency now that's become that clearinghouse for transcripts from that institution? Or sometimes students will figure it out on their own, but that I can see that being even like a point of frustration for students, that how do I even get this transcript? You're requesting it, but how do I even get it? So sometimes we put on that hat of just being a detective and helping a student navigate that process to request that official transcript. And there have been instances where an official transcript is just not available. And at least at Portland State, this is on a case-by-case basis. We have waived that specific transcript requirement. Once we have to look at that on an individual basis, but I've worked directly with students where we've done that. Once again, that's on really an individual basis that we have to evaluate that.
Yeah, great points. Thanks for pointing those out. And I'll hand it over for you for some of the obstacles transfer students can face as well, in addition to what we've already talked about.
Yeah, I think sometimes for transfers, a concern is what may be perceived as a lack of scholarship opportunities at an institution, or maybe they entered as a first year at an institution, they've had an aid package that includes scholarships. Are there opportunities available at your institution for transfer students? Are there specific transfer opportunities, or just for new students? Because as we know, the funding piece is really critical. So I think talking through the opportunities that are available, maybe specific to transfer students or just to new students, but also I think having that conversation about, as a continuing student, what would be available to you in the future. I think it's really important for students as they're doing their planning. Now, credits not transferring, the one that I think I hear pretty frequently, and I think probably Jesse does as well, or is when a student registers online to have an appointment with me, is I want to talk about how credits will transfer, or if my credits will transfer. And at least what I can say for the public universities in Oregon and for Portland State, anything at the 100 level or higher will transfer in some capacity. Courses that are not at the 100 level, so an example might be like a Math 95, and it was offered at the Oregon community colleges. It was the perfect place for the student to start in terms of their math experience, but unfortunately, it doesn't transfer to Portland State. And so I think having that conversation with students, getting back to accreditation, right, as Jesse referenced, and I'm sorry, the courses just aren't going to transfer because it's not a regionally accredited institution. And so sorry, but those courses will not play a role. Now, maybe for some institutions, there may be an exception to that policy, but just in general, when it comes to accreditation, again, the institution's not accredited, the credits, unfortunately, will not be accepted. Posting a transfer credit. So I think for many institutions, they'll have like a degree tracking system. At Portland State, we call it DARS, that students can see how coursework transferred to the institution, track their degree progress. Are the credits being posted? That's always a concern. It's like, I'm not seeing certain credits. And it may be a situation where we didn't get the student's updated transcript. It just didn't come to us. And so making sure that as we work with students, hey, this is a final reminder. If you have coursework in progress, get that final official transcript to us, please, so we can make sure that we update your record, that the credits are being reflected. Transcript processing. We see this as well. Students will request a transcript and I'll say, hey, I got an email that says that Parchment sent my transcript to PSU, but it does take a few business days for my colleagues on the intake team to get the transcript, scan it, upload it. So there's certain steps. So as I explained that, the students say, okay, now it makes sense, because I thought maybe as soon as you got it, you could start processing it. Well, it usually takes a few days. business days to process your transcript. So be just a little patient with us, please. I think for institutions is, do you offer on-campus housing? Once again, we know that can vary by institution. At Portland State, we do have housing for transfers and continuing students. And since transfers will tell me specifically is nothing against first-year students, but this is not my first experience on a college campus, so I want to live in a community that includes fellow transfer students as well as maybe continuing students. I'm just in a different place in my journey, so can be respectful of that. So communicating what those housing options are on campus, but also just having an awareness of what's available off campus for students, what's near your campus. Childcare at Portland State, we have a significant student population that has children or dependents. And so does your campus offer resources and services for students who have children or dependents? In-person campus visits, transfers want to see your campus, right? They want to, if they can I come and take a campus tour? Is there an information session? Can I maybe meet with an advisor or a faculty member for my program of study? Do you have transfer specific opportunities? At Portland State last night, we had our transfer open house for the month of January. So we have some transfer specific events. And then I think just the transition itself, even though student has been attending a college, university, or maybe it's been multiple, still it's a new experience at our respective campuses. And so it's learning the physical layout if they're taking classes in person. What resources do I have access to? The language, the acronyms, all of that, it's all brand new. And I can think about that when I was a transfer student going from a community college to a four-year institution. That orientation process takes a couple terms. And so that's something we try to be mindful is how do we help transfers make that transition to our campus? So Jesse, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I also know that many of us are recruiting for institutions that are, in pretty expensive cities. So that cost of living piece comes into play as well with students, in addition to financial aid and all that fun stuff as well. But when it comes to the housing piece, it's really great to have that knowledge of what's available on your campus. I mean, I think of Flagstaff, Arizona, it's a pretty expensive place to live compared to the rest of Arizona. So that's something that often comes up. So knowing those resources, like we have Louis' List, it's almost like a Craigslist for transfer students to find off-campus housing. And we have our Transfer and Online Connections, which is an office to kind of help with that transition. So learning about those different resources is really important to kind of hit to what Rob was just saying about that transition to these different institutions. And speaking of resources, whenever it comes to recruiting students, it is important to know which resources are available on your campus. So as you look through this list, you'll probably see some familiar names and familiar offices that you have on your own campus, but not every institution is the same. So for a brief amount of time in my career, I did work in TRIO Student Support Services, and not every institution has TRIO to really help those underserved communities. So knowing what your institution offers specifically is going to be very helpful for transfer students because, as we talked about on the first slide, many of them are coming from non-traditional populations. This may be their first time going back to college in 10 or 20 years in some cases. So being able to help them with this transition is crucial to making sure they're accessible, but also making sure that you're, yielding students whenever you're talking to these transfer students about how you can help them out. So often the first place I will send my students I will tell them, I am a recruiter. I am not an academic advisor. I can walk through a course catalog with you. I can show you where it is and how to use it, but I am not the best resource for telling you which classes to take. So getting them connected with your university advising office, or if they have a lot of transfer credits coming in, then connecting them with their academic college. So they're getting more specialized academic advising if your institution offers that model. The transfer centers I mentioned earlier, we have transfer and online connections at NAU, so they work with transfer and online students. Your institution may have a slightly different setup than that, but these will often exist in some capacity on your campuses. So, meeting with those people, getting to know them, so you can really direct students to them for those resources. And as I just mentioned a few moments ago, TRIO Student Support Services is a great option, especially if that student was in TRIO SSS at their community college or at another four-year institution, and kind of having that seamless transition from that institution, or if they were in something like Upward Bound in high school. So that's a really great resource. And different first-generation student offices. I've noticed that many of our transfer students are first generation in most cases. So again, having those resources for those students to really help with that transition to your institution. Veteran services are also going to be a great resource, especially if you have students trying to use their GI benefits and learning how to use that at a four-year institution. So getting them connected with your different veteran services if your institution offers that. And then transfer evaluation platforms are a really great resource for students to see if and how their credits will transfer. So I know in the state of Arizona, I think we have AZ Transfer as a great resource for students. At NAU specifically, we have Jack's Path, where students can insert their courses and see if and how they'll transfer to our campus. I believe institutions like Oregon State is one I'm familiar with that also has, I don't know how, I can't speak to the entire state of Oregon or Washington on this, but different institutions or different states may have their own platforms to where students can see how those credits will transfer over. So if your institution has that, I would personally go in and use it. I used my own credits from the University of Arkansas to see how they would transfer to NAU, and some of them didn't, some of them did, or some of them they had to get back to me. So it kind of showed me how that process worked. And then transfer guides. So I know whenever you're at a college fair, you may have your own transfer guides by major or by college. So getting familiar with those so you can really talk to students about how they're going to be transferring to your institution. And this next one I know is a very fun topic right now because the new FAFSA has been a little bit of a hot mess with its rollout lately. But many of our institutions, I know NAU specifically, we consider transfer students for financial aid and for scholarships from our institution using their EFC. So getting FAFSA completion is very important, just in terms for that federal funding, but also for different institutional awards. And then if you can really start working with your Phi Theta Kappa organizations at your community colleges, that's another great resource. This is a great organization. Typically they'll have their own state conferences. I've been to one in Arizona. I've been to a national conference in Denver a few years ago, and they're really great to get connected with students who are very dedicated, very excited, but also your institution may offer a Phi Theta Kappa scholarship that those students can apply for. So really using that connection, and they also have their own rating systems for how easy it is to transfer to different institutions around the country. So PTK is really great, and they have some good resources on their website too if you're recruiting transfer students. And then there are different agreements between institutions, especially between 4 years and 2-year institutions on like seamless transfers. So like at NAU, for instance, we have 2 NAU. We are partnered with every community college in the state of Arizona, several in Southern California, 1 in Dodge City, Kansas, which is kind of random, but we have that partnership. And students can seamlessly transfer from those 2-year institutions to a 4-year institution. Different states will have their own setups for that. But that's another great resource. If a student maybe isn't quite ready coming out of high school to go to a 4-year institution, that might be a good setup for them if they really want to end up at Portland State or NAU, to really get that connection going between the local community college to get them eventually to transfer to your institution. So these are some great resources that exist for transfer students. And Rob, I don't know if you have any more suggestions.
Jesse, I'll just add in terms of that category of partnerships or agreements that I think for many institutions they may offer, might be called dual enrollment or co-admission or degree partnership. But that's a great way for a student to essentially be admitted to the university and at the community college and be able to take courses at the university as well as the community college, and often it's one aid package between the 2 institutions. And so the student in many ways gets the best of both worlds. They have access to services and resources on both campuses, whether it's advising, mentioned the financial aid piece. Some institutions allow their dual enrollment or co-admitted students to live on campus. There might be some credit requirements in terms of they have to be enrolled in a certain number of credits, but the benefit of being enrolled at two institutions with one aid package in particular, students have a hard time passing that up. And once again, they could, even by term, they could potentially be taking all their courses at the community college, and then maybe it's all their courses at the university the next term. And so, you know, a co-admission, dual enrollment, or whatever it may be called in your state, your area, can be a great opportunity for students to once again have their foot in the door at two institutions at the same time.
Yeah, great points. All right. And I'll let you take over this next one.
And I think the next is for our colleagues that be working on the university side, but also maybe for our high school colleagues that are working with students who are considering starting their experience at a community college. And I think I even saw maybe in the chat sometimes there can be, you know, concerns. Is the right place for me to start, or perceptions in terms of starting a community college? There can be some challenges with that. But you know, thinking about, are you offering opportunities for transfer students to visit your campus? Is it transfer specific? I would recommend that. In some cases, you might see a smaller group attending, but I think there are some benefits of having a smaller event for transfer students. And we saw that, you know, last night with our transfer open house. Is it the same as a preview day on a Saturday? No, but it's a transfer specific event. And for transfers to connect with each other, to connect with our transfer returning resource center, financial aid, admissions. We allow transfers to apply for admission that evening. We waive the application fee and they walk away saying, hey, this is great. You know, there's some steps I've already taken. Offering the opportunity to meet with departments that do offer transfer support. So I mentioned at Portland State, we have our transfer and returning resource center. So advisors that will conduct unofficial transcript reviews, help students with course planning at the community college or their current institution before they even transfer, to make that process seamless. The Phi Theta Kappa conferences are great. I think I attended one so far, but it's a great way to meet transfer students, chapter advisors, folks that are directly involved with Phi Theta Kappa. Just got the invite today for their virtual spring fair. So I know I just registered for 2 today, and so excited about that. One-on-one meetings with students, whether you are, you know, visiting the community college or institution, so that it's you or your colleagues from the institution are going directly out to the colleges to visit. You may have a dedicated space. We have that in, there's one instance with Portland State, one of our community college partners, where we have a dedicated space where my colleagues is there once a week to meet with students or our colleagues from the community college. Students coming to campus and being able to meet with an admissions advisor, representative, or other folks on your campus. Very helpful. We hear that directly from our transfer students. And then I think, you know, I think Jesse, I got to give credit, came up with, you know, talking about transfer college fairs. So in our respective states, often there are opportunities where there's transfer specific college fairs. In general, those are, you know, typically hosted by a community college. It could be at another location, but typically it's community colleges they're hosting. And I think in terms of expectations, in terms of the attendance, could be a little bit lower compared to maybe it's a NACAC, you know, a national college fair, or maybe it's a regional PNACAC fair. Could be a little smaller attendance, but it's a great opportunity to have more, how I describe it, intimate conversations, one-on-one conversations. Keep in mind that students are going maybe to and from class or going home, and they catch you at the fair before they're heading out or going to work. It's a great way to network with our colleagues from the other college universities that are attending, or just representatives from the community college, from the advising center, or folks, once again, that are serving students at that institution. Always important to be very knowledgeable about your transfer specific services on your campus. So if there's something that you really want to highlight, make sure that you kind of come in ready to have those conversations with students, whoever's supporting the process, as well as colleagues on the community college campus. And then think about professional organizations that maybe offer opportunities in terms of college fairs, conferences where it's really focusing on maybe transfer specific topics or related, good way. And then, the other thing I think to keep in mind on the university side, I think we're starting to see some growth in terms of vendors that work directly in terms of serving transfer students. That's always been a challenge, and maybe even Palmer, doing this long enough, can go back. There's ways to maybe gather first year contact information through different vendors, but transfers, that's been a little trickier. But now we're seeing this evolution to where transfer names, leads are becoming more readily available as well. So to explore those opportunities or options as well in terms of building your pipeline. So Jesse, anything you want to add in terms of gauging your success?
Yeah, so also just a shameless plug, next week is the first week of circuits for Oregon Transfer Days. So like ORACRO is a great organization to be aware of if you're a transfer recruiter working in Oregon. But something that I also had to be aware of that you kind of mentioned at the very end there, it's often hard to track your leads with transfer students or to even track your data with transfer applications in some cases. So I know previously our old system at NAU, we had a hard time tracking how many applicants were actually from like the state of Oregon, for instance. So it was like they would report the last college they attended. So they may have actually been from Oregon, but they may have attended 5 or 6 different colleges, and their last one might have been in California. So it can often, whenever you're kind of downloading your data and trying to target where to go, your data may be kind of confused by where your student has gone to college. So kind of gauging your success there, if you're looking at numbers, can be complicated sometimes with transfer admissions, at least from my experience. And that's something that I've had to kind of think about when I'm gauging my success as a transfer recruiter, and that my data may be wrong in some cases, but we still need to go to these areas because I can tell from my inbox that I'm getting emails from students going to, Lynn Benton Community College or somewhere like that. So that can kind of be a complication sometimes whenever you have students attending multiple institutions and it skews some of your data in your application database. But that's a very specific situation. So you may not have that issue at your institution. And that's great. And we fixed hours, by the way. So good for me. But with that said, the floor is now open to any questions you may have or elaborating on anything that we talked about in this presentation. And I will bring up our contact information again. So if you want to reach out to us directly with any questions you have. But Palmer, I understand we have a few questions on the board here.
We do have several questions. So let me start with the one that Natalie put out here. And this is actually one that is very much a real life one for me. I have a meeting scheduled with one of our admits for next year who is out of state, low income, and was a very marginal admit. And so what tips do you have for having a conversation with a student about the community college / transfer route versus going straight into a 4-year? And I think very importantly, being, kind of tasteful and gracious in how you do that. Do you have some thoughts about, and also maybe overcoming, as Natalie put here, the stigma that maybe some people attach to that?
Maybe I'll start. I guess I had the benefit of kind of sharing my personal journey that I'll tell students that majority of my friends went to Oregon State University, growing up in Albany, Corvallis being right next door. Many went to the University of Oregon or went to like the University of Idaho was a big draw because of WUI. And so many of my friends went directly to 4-year institutions, and having a conversation with my father in particular to say, financially, it makes sense for you to spend at least 1 year or 3 terms at the community college. So you're paying that tuition at the community college. So we have some savings there. You can work. Your mother and I are going to let you continue to be under our roof. So rent-free, didn't have to pay for food. So reflecting back, it was a great experience for me in terms of a financial standpoint. But then the instructors that I had at Lynn Benton were phenomenal. So I made those connections, got a great education, was able to get involved on campus. Because I think sometimes there's that perception is students just come and go at the community college. No, there's great leadership opportunities or to work on campus, or there's intramural sports. So make the most of wherever you land, make the most of your experience. And I think and then also making sure I was taking credits that would transfer to the institution I knew I wanted to transfer to. It all worked out great for me. Not to say it's going to be that seamless experience for everyone, like it was for Rob Findtner, but I think for me, I reflect back and say, you know, my dad knew really what he was talking about. And I had two older brothers that went through the process, one that went directly to 4U, kind of bounced around a little bit, another that kind of went to community college, took some time off, made kind of the non-trad student. So joke is, by the time it got to me as the youngest, like, I think we got this figured out. We think this is probably going to work best for you. And I also got a scholarship as a transfer student from the institution that I transferred to. So that was phenomenal too, is that I worked hard and I was recognized for my achievements as a transfer student.
Can I follow up on that? Sorry, Jesse, I cut you off. I think one of the things that I like to make students aware of, not because it should necessarily change their mind, but just so they are making an informed decision, is that often first-time freshmen academic scholarships, for instance, will be larger than transfer academic scholarships. And usually the math still works out well because community college is so much less expensive. But that way they're not later on saying, why, you know, for instance, at University of Alaska Fairbanks, off the top of my head, I'm going to say our top scholarship for a freshman is $12,000 a year. But for a transfer student, it's $5,000 a year. Significant. So Jesse, did you want to jump on there too? Sorry.
I would say everything you just said, but often too, I notice this more at high school fairs, but you know, I'll get the question about, well, I want to be an auto mechanic, or I want to do something that's very trade or technical based. And I can tell these students, hey, we have mechanical engineering, civil engineering, et cetera, electrical, but that's not really doing what you want to do. So in many cases, you know, if a trade school or a community college offers you to be an auto mechanic or something of that nature, you need to go there. And it has the degree program you want to. I mean, we should say this to every student, like if you don't have their degree program or not. But in these specific situations, they have that degree program. And then I tell them, like, you could be highly successful with that. But if you decide that you want to be an auto mechanic and then open your own business, you can always transfer to NAU or to any other institution and earn a business degree or something of that nature to expand your business and learn how to do that. So you do have those pathways for various students based on what they actually want to do, and being honest with them about what your institution actually offers with those degree programs. And that's a conversation I have quite often. Another thing for me too is I grew up in a very, very small community. There were 14 people in my graduating class in high school in Southwest Arkansas. So, I mean, I went straight to a 4-year SEC institution, 450 people in my first class. That was very intimidating. So I often, when I'm out in rural areas, I'm also talking about the size of an institution. NAU has 21,000 students. Portland State's not it's not a small place either. So this can be intimidating for students. So saying, hey, starting out at your local community college may be an easier transition to getting your footing under you for those classes and then transferring later. So that is another conversation I have quite often in terms of being ready for that experience, because it can be very overwhelming just from personal experience there too.
Yeah, that's another one where I totally agree that for many students, you know, going to the community college for a vocational track is a great move. My daughter's doing that right now. I do often try and just mention, again, in the interest of making sure they're well informed, that sometimes those credits may not be very useful when they go to transfer elsewhere. Again, just so they don't say, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
So something I would love to hear you all unpack is these transfer fairs at the community colleges that you mentioned. And I know, Rob, you kind of were, you know, trying to be real gentle and saying, you know, sometimes they're not, you know, super well attended. I found myself over the years becoming very frustrated with them because the numbers usually weren't there. do you have any tips at all for how to make these community college transfer fairs more effective?
Yeah, some thoughts that I have. One is utilizing whatever for most of our for your partners, you have your CRM. There's an opportunity maybe to sending out that blast to students that are either prospects or admits. They're in your database just to let them know you're coming. I know for our ACRO, for our colleagues on the community college side, they work very hard to promote, to advertise these fairs, but I know there's only so much they can do. And so I think we have a responsibility as well as for your partners to say, just for any student who's at Chemeketa Community College, just throw that as a hypothetical, they're going to be coming your way and will be at the transfer fair. Because students will say, you know what, I didn't know, or I think I saw an email or went in my spam. And so it's good to know that there is this opportunity going to be coming my way. And it's also a great way for students is to meet representatives from multiple institutions. I know that Jesse's colleagues and Jesse will be at Oregon Transfer Day events. Palmer, I'm assuming you probably get to be there as well. And so it's a good way just for students to see what their options are. I think the other is, can you, we use the term a lot, piggyback on one of those events? I have a colleague that's going to be offering a transfer application workshop after one of the OTDs. Like, hey, I'm going to be there later in the afternoon. I'm going to apply for admission. It's going to be free. So getting creative, right? Enticing students maybe to come to the OTD, and like maybe there's some incentive to stick around. So those are some thoughts. And then I think if it's institutions or your assigned territories that you're spending that time, right? You're going back for tabling or for one-on-one appointments or just other activities. Maybe it's an application workshop. It does take work, right? We know for transfer recruitment, it could be a little different experience versus walking into a high school, working with one of our high school partners, and there's going to be maybe 10 students or 5 students or 20 students that are in a conference room or a classroom. Very different experience when you're at the community college, to where there's some times where you're like, okay, anytime now, I'd love to talk to somebody. And since we've seen that at the Oregon Transfer Days, where certain OTDs can be a little slower, or there's certain times where it's pretty quiet, and then traffic starts to pick up a little bit.
Something I have never done, but I'm curious if you've ever tried it or considered it. Just takes too much planning for me, is the idea of maybe buying an ad in the community college student newspaper to promote the fact that you're going to be on campus, or doing online advertising that's geofenced to the campus to let people know you're going to be there. But I've never had the capacity, the will, whatever, to do that. I don't know if anything like that's familiar to you all. Okay, we'll move on. Another question was up here. Brittany asked about the process of reevaluating transfer credit. So you've evaluated a transcript for credit and said, no, we're not going to accept that. What do your institutions do? I can speak to UAF, but what do your institutions do? Is it tough luck, or are there avenues for students to take?
At Northern Arizona, if it's coming from an in-state community college or U of A, ASU, like, it's pretty dead set. That's how the credit's coming over. But from without a state institutions, we do have a process for, they have to go through academic advisor to submit a claim to our transfer processing department to reevaluate that credit. So if they have, a complete syllabus, or a note from that institution that better explains the course description or something of that nature, they can reconsider it. But I would say probably 9 times out of 10, our transfer processing department is pretty strict on how they evaluate things. I've heard of a few cases of it being overturned for a student, but it's typically having to do more with how the credit transfers to that specific academic program as opposed to the university at large. So that's, I would say, probably for the most part, ours are pretty strict. It is what it is.
I'll say at University of Alaska Fairbanks, one of the things that I think is kind of cool is we actually, on our transfer admissions page have a link to an appeal form that you can use. And as you mentioned, Jesse, often that involves uploading a syllabus from the class that can be looked at. But I've really appreciated that sort of welcoming the question. So,
And I'll clarify too, we have that website called Jack's Path where they can
yes.
kind of do their own pre-advising to see how the credits will transfer. So there is a function in that website where we do, if we've never heard of a credit coming from University of Alaska, for instance, you know, Alaska History 101 or something like that, they do have the ability to share the syllabus and to share the course description, and we get back to them telling them. But again, that's like an unofficial evaluation. So we would officially evaluate that credit whenever we get their official transcript, and that would be the definitive answer there. So we try to kind of make that approachable setup that you're talking about. But once they're getting to the academic advisor level, it's pretty dead set at that point.
Up until a few years ago, the NACAC Statement of Principles of Good Practice basically made it kind of, it wasn't a legitimate practice to sort of re-recruit students who had applied previously to your school. Now we're in the wild, wild west of college admissions. Do you have any thoughts about re-recruiting students who maybe applied as freshmen but didn't enroll or anything like that? Would you caution against it? Do you already do it? Do you true confessions here?
So we we have a split, like we do not do that with at large with, you know, institutions that are regionally accredited, any of our in-state institutions, with the exception of those that are for-profit institutions that are based in our state. So there is some overlap there, but we do it very sparingly. And I think I think from the Arizona Board of Regents standpoint, it's like we're still going to stick with that traditional NACAC standard of not poaching, essentially. So it's very, very limited, but there can be some instances where, you know, overlap happens in some cases.
You know, I'll kind of put back when I was a director hat on for a second and say, you know, think about potentially using the National Student Clearinghouse data. That's something that we did in the past at a former institution, to where we would see, is the student enrolled at a community college? And if so, start that conversation about the transfer process. The intent was not to poach a student, to say, when you're ready to transfer, please keep us in mind. Maybe here are some specific resources or opportunities that are available. But we were very clear about not focusing on students who are enrolled at a four-year public or private. And so it was always looking at, okay, it appears based on the National Student Clearinghouse data, the student is at a community college. So let's start that conversation. And sometimes that sparked the students. It's like, yes, you know, I had applied previously and I will be considering you in a couple of years, or I'm a year out, or no, leave me alone, please unsubscribe, whatever the case may be. But yeah, focusing on students who, based on clearinghouse data, are enrolled at a two-year institution.
We've got some other questions here I'd love to talk to, but we're getting up at the top of the hour. I'd love to pick your brains some more on several things. But any other last thoughts before we wrap up? Things that you wished you'd put in your slides and you forgot until just now?
You know, I think quickly for our four-year colleagues, if your institution has not invested in a Phi Theta Kappa membership, it's something to think about in terms of transfer leads. Like if you're just struggling with that, it's something to think about in terms of a national as well as international reach when it comes to transfer leads, as well as some of the events. So just putting a plug in for Phi Theta Kappa, if that can maybe potentially work for an institution's budget, I'd like to put that in. The other piece quickly is the whole world of international transfer and international credit evaluation. We could probably do another seminar or webinar on that. That's not my area of expertise, but if folks are saying, gosh, I wish they would have talked about international, that could be just a completely different webinar, and it can be its own animal in some ways, might be the best way to put it. And I'll just leave it at that. But I know I have colleagues that work directly with, international credentials, the admission process, but just want to say that we weren't intentionally trying to not focus on that area, but once again, that could just be a webinar in itself.
And I don't think I have anything to add, and I would not be able to help with that presentation either because I'm not very familiar with that process. But yeah, well, thanks for having us on though to do this presentation today.
One thing that I was thinking of is when you were talking about credits never expiring, I wanted to mention I have been at some schools where some credits will expire. Sometimes they're in more technical areas or in the sciences where there's a great deal of change. So if that's true on your campus, don't be embarrassed. There are some exceptions to that. So with that, hey, thank you so much, Rob and Jesse. Ray, thanks for sitting in with me for this. Next month, February 8th, we'll be having our next session. We hope all of you will join us. Thanks for being here today, and good luck the rest of the way. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for having